We have Andrea Johnston from ISED, who's going to be speaking in her place. And Andrea is going to go first, followed by Seth Itzkan, who's president of Plant Tech, as it says in your program. Jarrod Goldin, who's an insect farmer who was here yesterday. We heard him comment. And Sarah Martin, an assistant professor with the Department of Political Science at Memorial in Newfoundland. Without further ado, I will welcome Andrea to the podium.
So yes, I'm not a former senator, and I'll bring a perspective that's a little different than JoAnne may have brought, but I'll talk to you from a government perspective of how we're supporting protein in terms of a tech play, a global R&D investment, attraction, and where we feel that of all the economic sectors in Canada, we are doubling down in agriculture and particularly in plant protein. So in budget 2017, and is from a government perspective, everything comes out, big news comes out in different budgets. The government announced 6 economic strategy tables, one in digital, one in advanced manufacturing, health and biosciences, clean technology, resources of the future, and the 6th one was agriculture. And that means that of those are the 6 sectors where they feel they're going to be the economic growth engines for this country. And their challenges was to recognize that with Canada's aging population and the competitiveness and productivity challenges, we need to rethink how these 6 economic sectors can unlock growth. Without that, our chair's kind of social security systems are going to be have significant challenges in terms of sustainability in the coming decades. So that was their challenge. So this is these are industry-led. It was chaired by Murad Al-Khatib, who's the CEO of AGT, which is a pulse company in Regina, but a global company. And he was surrounded by 20 agri-food companies, as well as 3 or 4 producers, and he also had a producer advisory council to support him. If you're interested, all of the economic strategy table reports are on the ISED Innovation, Science, and Economic Development website, so there's lots to do, and this is really about a call to action for Canada's competitiveness and innovation challenges. Their vision is by 2025, Canada will be one of the top 5 competitors in the agri-food sector, recognized as the most trusted, competitive, and reliable supplier of safe, sustainable, high-quality agri-food products, and an innovator in value-added products to feed the dynamic global consumer. We will have a leading digital and technology-based supply chain and stand out as the world's favored protein provider. And so that's their vision, and within their vision, they have a target of $85 billion in exports by 2025 and a domestic sales target of $140 billion. However, the table felt that in order to achieve this vision, what they needed was an agile regulatory system that supports innovation, provides certainty to government, and protects the health and safety of Canadians. A business climate that supports the scaling up of Canadian companies and makes us the top country in which to invest. A smart, interconnected transportation system that is free of bottlenecks. A broadband and IT infrastructure accessible in all communities and by all businesses. A labor force that meets the range of skills and experiences required to achieve sector growth targets, and access to global and domestic markets where goods are traded more freely. So right now, government is in this pre-budget period, so every department's putting what they call their budget ask to the Minister of Finance. They're taking what the 6 economic sectors have developed. They're kind of thinking which one can we implement, which ones we want to move forward, put some funds in, and expect to see some announcements on November 21st when the government announced its economic fiscal update, and in the budget later on in the new year, because these tables have kind of definitely built a roadmap. But I think what's just interesting is the discussion there about the favored protein provider. A lot of discussion about, do we focus on protein, and if we're going to double down in agriculture, we have to even double down a bit further and focus on protein. So that was one area. The other area that's quite interesting is the protein highway. This was the brainchild of a former Governor General David Johnston, and his idea was, well, we have similar landmass with our Midwestern prairie and American Midwest counterparts. We have similar climate. We grow similar proteins. It's that system of pulses for nitrogen fixing, then go on to canola as another round, and then go into spring wheat, and we kind of rotate that. And there's a lot more we can do in terms of research scientists and able to enable sustainable production, work on crop breeding, look at the research infrastructure, and have industry more integrated, because really that kind of Canada-US highway is incredibly tight, and there's a lot that they can do there. So that's pretty exciting as well in terms of the work that they're doing, and they've completed, I believe they completed an asset mapping of research infrastructure between the two countries, so that's something to keep an eye on as well. And the one area that I'm particularly involved in right now and fairly excited is Canada announced 5 superclusters, and the government of Canada is putting an investment of $950 million. And this is, again, where the government of Canada feels we need to double down and focus and target our investments. So we're targeting our investments in digital, events manufacturing, artificial intelligence, oceans, and protein. We had 50 applications, and we drilled down to 5. And that, again, shows you the commitment of the government to support research scientists and industry in their moving forward in terms of developing the crop breeding, the sustainable production, the export capacity, because this is like it's a 13 billion global market, and Canada has the right opportunities. We've got the global reach. We've got very strong science. We need to continue to build the value-added capacity in Canada. What we don't want to do is to grow pulses, export it, and then get them processed, value-added opportunities in other countries. So this cluster, and as I mentioned, the other ones, those are pretty big areas as well. So the fact that the government is focusing on agriculture protein, particularly plant protein, is a very exciting area. Their goals, and we're just in the last stages of negotiating the contribution agreements with the 5 superclusters. And it's different because it's about building an ecosystem. It's not just government giving money to industry and then determining the projects. We're putting a lot of effort that there's a spillover effect. So we want to ensure that there's emphasis on talent and jobs. And so a lot of the discussion for the protein supercluster has been bringing the universities, bringing the colleges together to see how we can ensure we have the talent to undertake these bold objectives. We want inclusiveness. The government is committed to inclusive innovation, so we're looking at opportunities to bring Indigenous and women-owned businesses into these clusters. And the government is also committed to clean growth, so there is an expectation that these projects enable more sustainable production. So it is exciting. In the end of the 5 years, when the government funds will move on to other areas, we expect to have an economic impact of $4.5 billion with this protein supercluster and the creation of more than 4,500 jobs. And again, so I gave you 3 examples of where, from a government perspective, there's a lot of attention on protein. I know throughout the last couple of days you would have spoken about the global opportunities, the opportunities in Canada, how we can ensure we do it in a more sustainable way. But there certainly is a lot of interest from the Government of Canada's perspective, both from Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, where I spent a decade, and then also in Innovation, Science, Economic Development, that this is a key area where we want to focus our innovation investments, focus them in areas where we do have global market opportunities, and bring the best talent to Canada and enable us to succeed. Thank you.
Great. So now we'll hear from Seth Itzkan. You have PowerPoint? Yeah.
Show me that real quick. Okay, just point it at the screen. Okay, great. Okay. Hello, everyone. Good morning. It's an honor to be here today with you all at this prestigious event. It's really from my heart. It's very special, and thank you. I want to open with an apology, actually, for perhaps getting a little too animated yesterday. We've determined I just didn't have access to the Canadian CBD oil, and hopefully we will rectify that. Also, this is the first time for me to be at a conference with two philosophers. And again, it may have seemed that the esteemed Professor Andrew Denton and I were perhaps locking horns with each other, but I can assure you we are now best of friends. And we have a fondness in Greek tragedies, and we were wondering which Greek tragedy best expressed our situation. We decided it was not Oedipus. But of course, perhaps Ulysses, and we all have our hero's journey, right? And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to be heroes in the world, and some of us have different opinions about how to do that. So I actually, let me start the timer here. I actually, a couple minutes, okay. So obviously I'm defending the, well first, just to be clear, so I'm representing Soil for Climate today. I have a private consultancy called Planetech, but I'm here as Soil for Climate, and my colleague Carl Tiedemann is in the front row. So obviously from yesterday and from our comments, you know that we are in support of animal agriculture done right as a climate solution, and we believe there needs to be, quite frankly, much more of it. So our disagreement is on the messaging around less meat. We would say, of course, less industrial meat, of course, but also less industrial soy and less industrial, forms of agriculture in general. And for us, we say the proof is in the soil. Like, either the soil's getting better or it's not. And the carbon market, so again, the whole investment side of this is going to be in carbon markets, or that's one of the ways. And the proof is going to be in the pudding, literally. The methodologies which are improving soil carbon are going to be the ones that are going to be rewarded. And quite frankly, it's going to be regenerative grazing on most of the earth. And there's going to need to be a lot more cows managed properly to restore most of the planet. And that's also where the greatest carbon drawdown is going to be from. And again, with all the respect that I could muster for my good colleagues from Greenpeace and elsewhere, I understand where you're coming from historically, but that's not the correct narrative to bring into the future. The correct narrative to bring into the future is that we have to restore soil. Most of the world's soil is in semi-arid, non-temperate environments, and it needs ruminants, and it needs lots of them, and they need to be managed properly. Okay, that's the thesis. It's hard to see, but the land on the left is obviously the restored land. The land on the right is desertification. And you would look at this and you think this is a fantasy. It's not. This is reality. I've been to this fence. I call this the paradigm fence. And I just ask you, which side of the paradigm are you on? Okay? Sometimes I open with this slide, I say, which side gets more rain? Which side produces more food? Which side is more hopeful? And the zinger is, which side has 4 times as many livestock? Hello, the side on the left. And how do you think they're managed? Regeneratively. And when I go to Zimbabwe, where I've been multiple times now with Alan Savory and those crew, they're already close to 5 times the amount of livestock that they had when they inherited the property. And Alan Saver recently said, we probably need to double that. So we're completely missing the understanding of the role of ruminants in regenerative ecology. We're just in a totally different space. So I invite you to literally step across that fence into the paradigm of the regenerative future in which livestock are absolutely essential. Now that I've been so serious, I kind of want to be a little more fun. So I'm just going to zip through these slides, and there's a whole bunch here. And you know what? I gave a TEDx talk. You can find it, and all these slides are there, and you can see Alan's TEDx talk. But it is kind of not the best visuals here. This is called the two-tree site, bare for decades. Okay, now they increased the livestock by 5-fold, and they managed properly. And now look. The land is coming back, that's me. And I say, don't tell me it doesn't work because I'm standing in the efficacy. All right? And when you've stood in the efficacy, I'm sorry, you just take these things personally. You can't hear the message that it doesn't work when you've stood in the proof of it. Okay, so I just want to get on to something more fun. The whole thing about water is confusing because when you restore soil, you get more water. That's how you replenish the water table. So we need. People talk about we want a broad view. Yes, exactly. Okay, I just want to get through this quickly because there's all this data is out there. All these papers are out there in terms of what the drawdown can be. I'm saying basically between 25 and 60 tons per hectare. And when you do this globally and the amount of grazing lands that's available, 88 to 210 gigatons, or about 41 to 99 parts per million drawdown through regenerative grazing on depleted land. Tara Garnett didn't like that, and she called me out on it specifically. I'll be happy to debate her about this anytime, anywhere. If people know her and you want to set it up, please let me know. But now I want to get to the little bit of a fun. Okay, so this is just a picture of how we think about the future. This was the real cover of the New Scientist magazine. This is how they ended the last millennium, 1999. They said the next 100 years. And all this doomsday stuff. This is the actual cover from their magazine, and pictures of how everything is going to be so horrible, but geoengineering will rescue. And I was just so upset, I took out my copy of Photoshop and I just remade the magazine. So, you know, how we think about the future is important, and so thank you. So this is, okay, now I want to get to the fun part. Okay, because we're at the Alec Trebek Forum, I thought we would just quickly, you know, for a little bit of fun, play an episode of Future of Sustainable Protein. And I wrote the questions and the answers, and I'm the moderator. So you need to answer it the way you think I would answer it, not necessarily the way it might be true. Okay, but everything I say, say scientific scrutiny will prove it out. Okay, the answer, the future of protein. Let's do two teams. Let's say the left side, the right side. Left side. What's the question?
What is regenerative agriculture?
That's good, but that's not the answer that I'm looking for. The future of protein. Yes! Yes! What is regeneratively produced meat? Very good. Yes, we get the ding. Next one, the answer. The place where most atmospheric carbon will be sequestered. What's the question?
What is soil?
Yes! Very good group here. The answer, a method of management to assure livestock get to the right place at the right time for the right reason. What's the question? Yes, very good group here, holistic plant grazing. Answer, a synthetic, a synthetic fake meat product that purports to be the future of protein but isn't. Okay, well, that's good enough. It's what is beyond meat? And then the last one, the answer, this financial instrument, abbreviated CRC, and created through open source blockchain technology by new companies such as Nori, that should be Nori, is central to carbon markets. What's the question? The last Jeopardy question is always the toughest. Consider this double Jeopardy. Do, 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 do. Abbreviated CRC, that's the giveaway. Come on, you can take out your smartphone and look it up. All right, okay. What is a carbon removal certificate? And because this is the forum on investment, please look up NORI, N-O-R-I, and look up blockchain technology and carbon removal certificates. And they wanted to be very careful to use the term certificate versus credit. There's nuances in the differences of language there. So our proposition also is that the carbon markets and using technology and companies like this will be part of the investment strategy for drawdown, and that regenerative grazing will actually be one of the cash cows, if you will. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Seth. Okay, so now we have Dr. Jarrod Goldin, president and co-founder of EntomoFarms, who apologizes. Do you want to tell them? He has to leave right after because he's running to catch a plane.
Yeah, again, thank you for the organizers and Ryan and Shannon. It's been a fantastic couple days, and it's been lovely meeting everybody, and I appreciate the passion and the love and everybody's commitment to, I think, summed up very well, to not be an asshole and leave the world in a better place than we found it. Maybe the most important thing I'm going to take home, and certainly underscores the way I try to live my life. So before we get started, I think a kind of framework or context I want to offer about this whole edible insect business paradigm, new protein, is really to look at it maybe in an analogous way to the way in which we've learned that working out in the old traditional way isn't the best way to maximize strength or fitness or cardiovascular health, that doing things more dynamically or in different ways may improve your efforts when you're going to the gym. So I think the question first is, can edible insects play a role in improving people's health and health outcomes? Is it a food that can act medicinally? Can the fiber be of benefit to the gut biome? Can the protein be absorbable? How much more absorbable, or if at all, compared to meat? What about the other macronutrients and micronutrients? So studies are already showing that in certain situations, like with iron and magnesium, manganese, copper, and zinc, that the concentration of these minerals was much higher in the crickets than meat, but more importantly, it was far more bioavailable. So already there's anecdotal evidence to suggest that edible insects are really, really healthy, and that their nutritive value is excellent, and there may be clinical benefit. An observational study found in communities where they eat a lot of edible insects, there was very low incidence of autoimmune diseases. So there's universities in Israel that are now looking at whether there's a positive correlation there, and those are some of the reasons. So that's kind of the framework. It's not to disrupt the meat industry per se. It's not, like we've discussed earlier on, that these are contrast. It's either this choice or that choice. It's not binary. If edible insects are healthy for you the same way water is, maybe you want to drink more water, and maybe you want to eat more insects. You can still eat steak, you can still eat fish, you can still eat chicken, no problem. All this is an opportunity to give people another choice about food that may be healthy, that most of us in the West have largely dismissed for all the wrong reasons over the last few generations. So that's the context here. Given that this panel is really around investment, I'm going to try kind of share our journey of over the last 4 years of how we started, the money we raised, who our investors are, and kind of where we've landed today. So EntomoFarms was founded by myself and my two brothers, Darren and Ryan. They had been farming insects for about 10 years for the reptile business, for people's snakes and bearded dragons and stuff like that, and the bait industry. And they have a wonderful company that's been successful doing that. I was always envious and wanted to join them in business. We're one of those weird, tight, close families. I was just looking for that opportunity. My background is in chiropractic. I've been in healthcare, witnessed the association between what people eat and how healthy they are, especially with respect to musculoskeletal health. And they were having much too much fun without me. So when the United Nations and the Food and Agriculture Organization put out that paper that was referenced in another slide yesterday, titled Edible Insects, Future Prospects for Food and Feed Security, and around the same time, a gentleman was on Shark Tank pitching a protein bar made with this stuff called cricket powder. And my brothers had already been kind of looking into it a little bit and did some studies with Guelph, and I called them up and I said, this is it. There used to be 3 ducks, now there are 3 crickets. They're in a row. This is our chance. Let's see if we can convince an investor to make a small investment, and let's start North America's first human-grade edible insect farm, and let's see if the United Nations, if that fire can really underscore an opportunity to get us started. And that's what we did. So we started with 5,000 square feet. Now, we've heard a lot over and over again that edible insects are eaten in 80% of the world. Billions of people eat them every day. They are a complete protein. They have all essential amino acids. Again, when comparing cricket powder to a steak, they're twice as high in protein. Meat's about 30%, crickets are about 60%. So maybe crickets are the most efficient source of protein, and it's not red meat. We have to look at digestibility studies and that kind of thing along the way. But the exciting part for us, and I can tell you for our investors, is not necessarily the protein piece, because as we've learned, most North Americans get enough protein, albeit perhaps it's not the most sustainable source of protein. And again, that's not the emphasis of the argument. But what we are is fiber deficient. And it may be that the chitinase and chitin fibers in edible insects are the best source of fiber for the human gut biome. How interesting would that be? And a lot of the root vegetables that had far superior fibers than the vegetables we have today, we don't farm anymore. And yukon root is a good example of that. So they have a complete nutrition profile. I think the iron and B12 and fiber are perhaps the most exciting elements of their nutritive value. They use less resources than meat and other livestock. How much less? We've got lots of work to do to figure that out. I don't even think that we understand the gray, the blue, and the green water associated with meat farming. In insect farming, I'm sure it's less. Is it 10% less or 10,000% less? I'm not sure. But if we look at average numbers that are out there and what we've learned today, if a family of 4 chose to get their protein from insects instead of red meat 1 day a week for a year, so in the morning they put some cricket powder in a muffin, and in the afternoon they sprinkled some crickets on a pizza, and in the evening maybe they made a chili with some cricket powder, that family would save about 650,000 liters of water a year. So if you begin to extrapolate that, and that's all forms of water, and that's, again, just using the average numbers that are out there from the WHO, and maybe they're not exact, but I think they're a framework to start with. So we are being inundated with researchers all over the world, master's students, PhD students wanting to study all elements of this. One of the most exciting pieces is the HNRCA at Tufts University brought academia, industry, and the government together. We put out a white paper that's in the Journal of Nutrition that underscores a framework for what is the pathway to research look like for this category. And let's get some collaboration going and accelerate the research. That's my brother Darren, and he's holding up what's called a cricket condo. So we grow these insects in retrofit chicken barns. We have now almost 80,000 square feet of retrofit chicken barns. And then we have a processing facility, which isn't a processing facility because processing means you add or you remove something from the food. We don't. We rinse them, we dehydrate them, and we grind them. So I don't know what word in English to use for our process because it's not processing of anything. It's a whole food that's unprocessed, which You look at the ingredients, and it just says cricket powder. So how many packages in a grocery store have one ingredient on their list? Milling. So it's our milling facility. Great, thank you. 2 things I can take home. So that's what the chicken barn looks like. Now, in each barn, there's about 35 million crickets. So we have over 100 million head of cricket. Maybe we're the biggest farm in the world. I'm not sure. Our livestock's pretty small, but that's okay. Here's what it looks like inside. So these are the cricket condos. The one on the south side are much more expensive than the ones on the north side. They're closer to the lake. And they're essentially free range. They hang out, they hide, they eat, and they drink. There's no stress. They live their full life cycle, which is about 6 weeks, so they would die in a couple of days if we didn't cull them anyway. The basic grains for now, and a water trough. And that's it. And you would know if they're happy, and you would know if they're stressed out. If you walk in there and there's very little movement, they're happy. If they're stressed, they're jumping all over the place. And it's only the male crickets that are mating that chirp. And my brother always says, you know, 1 chirping cricket in your house can drive you crazy, but thousands of them up north sounds like a symphony. So here, we're really a business-to-business business. I think we would love to model the sun-made raisin business, where everybody's bought a pack of the red sun-made raisins in a grocery store. But what you don't know is they're really a wholesaler, and every raisin and every muffin and bread probably comes from Sun-Made. So we want to supply our powder and crickets all over the world, but we also would love to sell our powder and our roasted crickets as an ingredient in grocery stores. But we may not want to compete with our customers who are making consumer packaged goods like these chirp chips that you can find in some Loblaws. These were 3 women from I'm not sure which university in the Northeast US, but they're now in San Francisco. This is the second business that Mark Cuban invested in that is an insect-based business. And these chips are delicious, and they're made with vegetables and cricket powder. So you can send your kid to school with a bag of these chips, and they probably have the healthiest lunch on the playground. Paul had some of these slides up yesterday, and thanks for that shout out there, Paul. And this is what a future aisle may look like in a grocery store, where you may have this sustainable protein aisle or something like that from a marketing perspective. And what we've learned is if you just have a bar or you just have a bag of powder on a shelf, it doesn't sell well. But when you have pasta and pasta sauce and chips and crackers and everything, the perception is the category is normalized, legitimized, and people, I think, see, oh, I'll buy that for my kids and that for my wife, and I'm going to take these home. That's what the President's Choice is, the 5th most trusted brand in Canada. We launched with President's Choice in the spring. It's been extremely successful. They're rolling it out into 800 Shoppers Drug Mart. So we tested the thesis that there is pent-up demand from the low-house consumer, a lifestyle of health and sustainability. That demographic is not specific to anybody. There's seniors who care, and there's young people who care. So it's so awesome to have Loblaws normalize the category and give us that platform. The second is that we got an investment from a large Canadian food company called Maple Leaf Food. They took a minority stake in our business. I believe that their passion and their desire to innovate is sincere. Everything they've worked with us on and done with us so far has demonstrated that, and we're really excited. This was a huge ad that Loblaw put on a subway station downtown. It's cool to see. You can see the size of it with the woman next to it. This is one of our customers from Montreal. Amazing product, gorgeous packaging, absolutely delicious. These are healthy protein bars. They're fruit-based, they're cold-pressed. Same thing with the crackers, awesome with some hummus. So you can begin to see where the CPG piece of this will go. Thank you very much. And again, I really appreciate everybody's point of view and perspective and passion, and all the best to all of you. And thank you, Ryan, and thank you, Shannon.
Great. So last up, we have also Dr. Sarah Martin, Assistant Professor with the Department of Political Science at Memorial University.
Good morning, everyone. I'm really pleased to be here. Thanks to Shannon and Ryan for bringing us all together. I'm really appreciative. I'm very, very humbled to be here today. I also want to thank all the people that have fed us and cleaned up after us today and yesterday, all the folks who work here that support us in the work that we're doing. And in addition, thanks to all the folks who provided the food that have nourished us over the last couple of days. The title of my presentation today is the future of protein, the and market, not the or market. I specialize in the global political economy of food and agriculture, and I specialize in finance, looking at agricultural finance. The question we were asked to reflect on this morning was, how can innovation and investment in agri-food help tackle environmental problems associated with the production and distribution of protein foods while helping sustainable production models scale up? So here's my argument. The future of protein will be shaped by those who are investing and betting on protein markets today. Spoiler alert, it is primarily the same large agri-food corporations that dominate industrial agriculture today, unless we change. In the last couple of days, we've had a lot of focus on production, debates about different models of animal agriculture, cricket agriculture, and so on. And we've talked a lot about changing the habits of consumers. But we haven't touched much about what Jennifer Clapp would call the middle. What is shaping the choice for farmers, different kinds of production models, different kinds of ways of being on the land, and what's shaping the choice of us consumers at the other end? So I want to talk a bit about the middle. To understand my argument, I want to talk briefly about how agriculture and investment have long interacted and the special challenges of agricultural finance. I will then discuss who is investing in alternative meat products or alternative proteins, let's say, and what makes these markets especially valuable to those investors. Finally, I want to suggest that the characteristics that make these markets valuable are the very characteristics that create barriers to more socially and environmentally just food system by crowding out alternatives. So I want to talk a bit about agricultural finance. As many of you know, for a variety of reasons, agriculture is risky. We have drought, we have volatile commodity markets, we have diseases for animals and so on, diseases for plants. And because of this risk, private capital has generally been very reluctant to invest in agriculture. As a result, for most of the 20th century, governments in the global north, and to a certain degree in the global south, especially around independence movements, have created policies, institutions that support farmers, and at the same time rein in excessive speculation in food and agricultural markets. State regulations have also been in place to assure competition. That is, to restrict monopolies and oligopolies from controlling agri-food markets. And why have these models been in place? Why have these regulations and policies been in place? Because during the 20th century, farmers were a strong political force, especially in the early part of the 20th century, and they pushed for these changes. But in the last number of decades or so, supports for farmers have shifted and in many cases been eroded, and financial regulations have been relaxed. And we've seen an uptick in corporate concentration, especially in agri-food, the same kind of corporate concentration that we saw in the late 19th century that these regulations were put in place to constrain. Now, these changes, relaxation and regulation around finance, relaxation around competition controls, have implications for innovation and investment in agriculture. As state support has pulled back, private investment continues to be reluctant because of these risks. But what if there were ways to limit these risks for private investment? Limit market risks by, let's say, controlling aspects of the agricultural market, such as the market for protein. This is already happening with global corporate consolidation. In the agricultural input sector, for example, in the last year, we've seen the recent merger, or actually acquisition by the German company Bayer of the US-based Monsanto. We've seen continued consolidation in the meat sector. I'm talking global meat sector. The Chinese corporation Shineway bought the largest US pork producer, Smithfields, a couple years ago. So we see large corporations operating in the middle. Okay, so let's see. So who are the key investors today? I'm going to use two examples from the US, two agri-food corporations who are investing in alternative meats, specifically Tyson and Cargill. I want to start with Tyson. It's a $39 billion meat and processed meat company. Tom Hayes, the CEO of Tyson, has recently discussed how his company is going to be focused on sustainable proteins and cleaner foods. And he's led the change at Tyson from a meat producer and processor to a protein producer and processor. And this has led a shift in the company to invest in cultured meats, plant-based alternatives. So these have included Future Meat Technologies, Memphis Meats, both cultured meats, and Beyond Meats, the plant and Beyond Meat. The second example is Cargill, although Maple Leaf is also claiming to be the most sustainable protein company as well. So we see that change in Maple Leaf as well. Cargill CEO David McClellan, in a recent interview, extolled the value of alternative proteins from pea powder to cellular meat, and like Tyson, Cargill also bought a stake in Memphis Meats. So according to him, the future for Cargill is in the lab. It's with alternative proteins and with more efficient animal agriculture. As many of you know, Cargill is the largest privately held corporation in the United States. We're not too sure exactly how big it is because it is privately held. So we have companies, whether Tyson or Cargill, turning their companies towards protein and seemingly away from animal agriculture, seemingly away from animal industrial agriculture. So what do these investments look like in the context of these corporations? Tyson's Executive Vice President of Corporate Strategy and Chief Sustainability Officer stated, when we think about investments like this, we're thinking about an and model, not an or model. In fact, the investments in alternative proteins pale in relation to these corporations' business models. Cargill, as I mentioned, there are no clear figures because they're privately held, but they recently stated that they've invested nearly $600 million in conventional protein. Okay, that's industrial animal protein. In other words, CAFOs and other industrial models that have been critiqued over the last couple of days. And Tyson has started a venture capital fund that is investing in sustainable technology investment, around $150 million in these alternative proteins. But this fund of $150 million is not just alternative proteins, but it's also other kinds of sustainable tech. So the amount of money that they've invested in sustainable technology, including alternative proteins, is less than half the cost of a recent poultry plant that they're building and pales in comparison to their other investments in industrial animal agriculture. So why the interest? So first, I just want to sort of summarize is that although these companies are turning towards alternative proteins, their actual investments in alternative proteins are very minor compared to the majority, the vast majority of their work. So why the interest in this sector? Albeit limited, as I stated, if this agricultural sector is risky. The key is how to scale up these alternative proteins. And I'm going to be looking at some of the issues around cellular meat and why they're investing particularly in this model. No technology is neutral. And I would argue that technology, whether agroecology or regenerative agriculture or lab-grown meat, requires regulatory supports, it requires resources, and it requires institutions. Why this interest in lab-grown meats? The key is vertical integration or market control. The Good Food Institute, it's a nonprofit that works with scientists and investors and entrepreneurs around plant-based food and also the cultured meats that we're talking about, maps out 6 elements that are required for cultured meat. Cell lines, cell culture media, scaffolding and structuring, bioreactors, and supply and distribution. These are the steps that are required to get cultured meat to the market. What's important about mapping out these steps is that these are the critical technologies that are required, but they serve as lucrative intellectual property licensing opportunities. In other words, IP, intellectual property, is foundational to the supply chain, and IP will become the quote-unquote guiding factor of companies' future focus and key to securing the vertical integration of supply chains. Technology is not inherently good or bad, but it does arrive with a framework. It is not launched alone. In this case, intellectual property rights are critical. And this goes back to an earlier point. Agriculture. It can be a challenge to make money because of the risk. Much of the risk can be alleviated if you control the market. One way to do that is through intellectual property rights. Control of supply chains is really the ultimate aim of intellectual property, the cell-based meat startups. And they'll, in interviews, they'll absolutely say this. This is what they're after. The venture capital is in there to get the intellectual property rights in order to gain purchase in the markets. So I just want to summarize a bit here. While the alternative protein market is growing, it is small. It's very small, and is expected to have little or no impact on traditional pork, meat, or poultry demand. It is business as usual with industrial meat. If we are looking for socially and environmentally just food system, we have to look at who is sitting and operating in the middle, between farmers and consumers. In turn, we can look to the past for how to reassert fair competition and access, and we need to look towards the future and the multiple ways that people around the world sustain themselves through many different food systems, and we need to re-embed the marketplace within environmental and social constraints rather than market constraints. Thank you very much.
Okay, that was just great. It reminded me, the panel, of that expression, to a worm in horseradish, the world is horseradish. I'm a sociologist of technology and innovation, and I thought the panel would be about innovation, and it was. But everyone seemed to grab on to investment in innovation. So, so that was interesting to me. I was going to do maybe a brief summary of each of the panelists to facilitate discussion, but I think in the interest of time, we've gone a bit over. I will just invite the panelists to respond to one another. Is there any conversation that we want to have among ourselves before turning it to the audience? Yeah. Seth.
I'll just say that it's just delightful to hear all the different ideas. I love the cricket idea, and I had some crickets last night in that meringue that people were here last night. It was a little crunchy, but it was okay, right? And then, so that's like the good news. The sort of the bad news is like what the last speaker just said about the IP in the sort of the fake meat movement. That's a problem, and I don't know quite what the solution is, but I acknowledge that that's a problem. Yeah.
I wonder if, do you want to elaborate a tiny bit, Seth, and say for whom is that a problem, or what's the problem in your...
I mean, as you heard, I mean, we stand against the fake meat movement. You know, we want real meat, the animals are on the ground restoring the soil. And I want to see much more of that. And I'm disturbed by the narrative that fake meat is a solution to anything. It's not. It's a disaster in every regard, except, apparently, for the people who have the IP and who are convincing other people that this is a good thing to invest in. So you've got your Leonardo DiCaprios, you've got your Bill Gateses running around the world say, oh, look at us, we're investing in Beyond Meat. To me, it's a disaster. It's hard to keep calm when I see this going on, because that's just ramming our life support system just head on into disaster. So it's all the wrong messaging, it's all the wrong forms of production, it's all the wrong forms of investing, and you're right, it's because of IP. And I don't know how to get around that. I don't know how to solve that problem except to measure the soil carbon. It's always just going to come back to the soil. Show me the data of the soil getting better, and the soil will always be getting better with regeneratively produced meat. It will always be getting worse with wheat gluten-based products, which is industrial wheat production with fertilizers and tilling and everything else. And so when the market shifts to carbon itself, that will be the solution. No one will want that IP because it'll be worthless.
I wonder if Sarah might just say, I read your paper as being slightly more than just problematic investment in cultured meat. Are there other kinds of problems that you were meaning to address?
Yeah, I think we have to really look at who's shaping those markets, and I would be cautious about creating new kinds of markets. For example, the carbon markets, or at least thinking about how they are formed. I guess my point is that how the markets are formed and who's actually operating in those markets, we need to pay very close attention to, and that the folks who are operating in those areas don't necessarily have the same considerations for the environment that the folks around these tables do. And there's also recent information, especially around blockchain technology, that is a huge environmental drag. There's huge issues around blockchain as far as the energy use of maintaining blockchain. And so I have some concerns about that. And then the main point is that in agri-food in general, we're seeing huge corporate concentration. And those operators are really shaping the market, and we really have to pay attention to those. And I really think that the government needs to intervene, especially around competition, to start directly challenging the power of those corporations and how they're shaping our agri-food systems. And I think we also have to look very carefully at intellectual property and its emergence since about the 1990s, especially around agri-food. That's where a lot of the corporations have really staked their claim, is around intellectual property, and they seemingly are doing that in the future as well.
I wonder if Andrea might respond to that, given ISED's moved.
Well, I could talk about the competition. Of course, in Canada, we have the Competition Bureau, and agriculture, in many ways, is just like the telecoms. Like, we want consumer choice. And so when Bayer and Monsanto merged, it had to go through a review, just like we want to ensure there's choice in the telecommunications. I mean, I think the reality is in every economic sector, that's the consolidation is happening more and more. But I'm wondering too, one thing we haven't really talked about and what I'd be interested in is consumers. I mean, at the end of the day, the marketplace is consumer preference, and that's why you're seeing Cargill and Tyson pivot from their traditional market segments to alternatives. And so I'd be really curious to know kind of like it's fascinating that Loblaws is taking you on, and they don't take people on without a lot of business analytics, so they must feel that there is an emerging consumer demand for what you're producing. And I don't know, maybe it's too early, but have you seen kind of your market, your demand increasing over the last couple of years?
Yeah, so, the first thing I want to say, and I agree with everybody's points, and they're, really in line, but when you consider the issue of food security, the one consideration for lab-grown meat, I mean, what if there's a natural disaster or a war that uses chemical weapons where the lands that we use and the pastures to graze the meat are completely wiped out? I would argue that having the option that's fortified, in place, efficiently to grow meat could be a great choice for if and when those disasters happen. And the neat thing about cricket powder, as one example of the insects, is the shelf life. We're doing a shelf life study. We're 2 years into it. There's no degradation. Like, it's quite amazing. And if stored in a cool, dry place, or made with a pasta that has 5-10 year shelf life, we may be able to store this food literally for the idea of food security should there be natural disasters or man-made disasters. So I don't think we should completely dismiss it, irrespective of the IP, irrespective of the politics, irrespective of the economics. Just for that reason alone may be a good reason to consider it. To answer your question, what I can tell you is that we had this thesis that there's pent-up demand from this low-house consumer for food that's healthy and sustainable. But we never had a platform to test that thesis. So we feel that President's Choice and their amazing team of innovators who chose to go forward with this gave us that platform. And without being very specific, I can tell you that in the first quarter, sales were 4 times higher than what they thought they would be. And because of its success, like I said, they're rolling it out into Shoppers Drug Mart. Now, there's a long way to go still, and I'm sure there'll be ebbs and flows, but they are committed. They'll be rolling out new products every quarter. It's part of their innovation strategy around sustainability. And like I said, I have these meetings with them. These people are trying to do what we're trying to do. I know they're Loblaws. I know it's Maple Leaf Food, but they also have children, and they also have grandchildren, and they also care about the environment and people's health. So, it sucks that economics is tied to all of this. I have to put a roof on my head, pay for my children's education. It would be awesome if we didn't have to, but we do, and we're working in the system that we have. With respect to the government loans, though, I have a question for you. Are most of that funding grants or loans?
They are, it's different programs have payable contributions, and the other in terms of the super clusters, it's industry matching funds, so it's like a grant. But other programs are repayable contributions. So if a company like Maple Leaf is looking to invest in a certain area and is successful in government, it's a repayable contribution after a certain number of years.
So, because we are the recipient, and we're excited and so grateful to have received about $750,000 in funding, but there's 7, 8, 9% interest rates. Mm-hmm. So it's tough for me to feel proud of a government that has lending money as a business of the government. Again, rather give away less without any interest than more with. And again, I know it's not easy, but it's just frustrating because we are losing our business to third parties, and it may soon not be ours. It's possible that it's not ours anymore. And we have some wonderful Canadian anchor companies that I encourage to step up and care to make a difference, because if the governments can't do it, then we're going to have to rely on the corporations.
Shall we move it out to the audience? Ryan, I think you had a question.
Two specific questions. To Seth, there were 2 questions that came up earlier yesterday, I believe, that I'm curious to hear your answers to them. Today, Scott asked a question about the carbon sponge, or the saturation point of carbon. I'm curious to hear your response to that. And Tulika had asked the question yesterday about, sure, let's use ruminants, but why do we have to eat them? I'm curious to hear your response to that. And I have a question for Andrea. A lot of the panels keep coming back to restorative agriculture and/or agroecology, which we've defined differently. But agroecology is clearly growing as a concept in the food movement and the agriculture movement, sustainable ag movement, and it's become mainstream now in global policy terms, in terms of the, every tweet that I see from the FAO is supporting agroecology, and sometimes I feel like the government's response is completely deaf to that in its focus on almost the opposite, is hyper-industrialization of our food sector to maximize these economic benefits and gains from trade. And I'm just curious to know if that is on the agenda at all in terms of an awareness of agroecology in government. Is that just not filtering through? Is it just sort of seen as a thing for the developing world? Like, I'm just curious to hear about whether that registers.
Who would like to start?
So I'll start in terms of, well, I mean, the terminology, agroecology, I think the terminology the government uses is clean growth, sustainable development, and that they haven't, and I'm not sure they're picking up that specific term. And so, like, I'll take an example from ISED. We have something called the Strategic Innovation Fund, and it enables R&D scaling up for companies. And in order to get repayable contributions, they have to commit to reducing greenhouse gases if they're creating a new manufacturing facility. What we're trying to do is just embed it in the economic discussion rather than have it as a separate piece. Whether that we're successful in that and you can demonstrate the usefulness, it's hard to tell, but we're trying to just not have a separate discussion about sustainable development. It has to be mainstream or it's just not gonna happen. And like, I come back to the example of McDonald's out west with sustainable beef. I mean, they develop the criteria for sustainable beef. They selected Canada and Canadian livestock ranchers to take this pilot on, and it creates a momentum on its own. And it's just, the reality is there's going to be tons of non-government organizations, multinationals out there. They understand the need for sustainable production. They understand where consumers are going. And in fact, they have more of an ability to make change than the government of Canada does. So we kind of have to find where our partners are, and sometimes our partners are multinationals, and we have to kind of work with them in developing those standards.
And if I can just add to that before Seth gets to his question. On a granular level, I can tell you that people reach out from MAFRA all the time to come and visit us, to come and see what we're up to host them for tours. CFIA, Jeff Leal, who was the Minister of Agriculture, actually was from Peterborough and where our farms are. So there was some really interesting conflicts of interest for him because he was fully supportive of what we were up to. But it will never be enough for me. I will always feel that they can do more. I'm curious why they're not pounding on our door as the largest supplier right now. A Canadian company has the opportunity to grow. We have to chase them. It surprises me that there aren't more people who are decision makers with purse strings knocking on our door saying, it's for real now, it's legitimized. How can we be of more support? So I'm grateful, and there's legitimate personal interest from the aspects of the government that we've seen, but I always wish they'd do more.
I think there were a few questions in the audience, maybe
so
back there, but
we'll go 1, 2, because they're
Okay, you
first,
found
and
them.
then we'll figure it out.
Sure. Yeah.
Did you want me to field that question before? Excuse me, did you want me to field the question that was already asked? So about the sponge, so, you can, just on your laptops right now, just Google carbon cycle. I've been doing this for years. The terrestrial biosphere is the largest sink, by far. And no one really knows how much really has been lost. but estimates are like a teraton, 1,000 billion tons. When Rattan Lal at Ohio State University, one of the world's sort of leading soil climate scientists, I mean, his numbers are conservative. He talks about hundreds of gigatons. I mean, I'll take it. I mean, all right, if it maxes out at 100, 200 gigatons, I mean, okay, that's an all right problem to have, I guess. The real sort of limiting factor, as far as I can tell, is the parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere. That's the actual limiting factor. That's the sort of the osmotic force, or the chemical force. Between the ice ages and the interglacial ages of the last million years or so, it's fluctuated between about 190 and 290 parts per million. And so what's called the interglacial, these sort of temporary warm periods, that's 290 parts per million. That's the high. When we get to the ice age, which is actually the more dominant regime, or climate regime, if you will, it's more like 190 parts per million. See, we're at 400 now. We're already in an entirely different atmospheric chemistry landscape. There's something called the equilibrium temperature, which is actually what the temperature would be in an equilibrium state for the forcing that the parts per million. It's 10 degrees C warmer than now. People just have no idea what's coming and how devastating it can be if we don't drastically change. And so this whole thing about the IPCC report, it's like, I hear people say, oh my God, I'm so worried about that. I'm like, you have no idea how watered down that document is. I mean, that's just like, Kool-Aid with no alcohol in it at all. And we need to be doing straight shots of what. Okay, so the reality, because of the mandate of the IPCC, is only to give a number by 2100. And that's it. So they can say 1.52 degrees C by 2100 if we do all. That's not how physics works. It doesn't just stop at 2100. It's an S curve. We're at the flat part of the S curve. And when it goes up like that? When the sea ice is gone. Remember in 8th grade in middle school, you did that little experiment with the water, with the ice in it, and you put it on the Bunsen burner, and it was always the same temperature, and the ice was getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And all of a sudden, when the ice was gone, the temperature went like that. It's not a gradual increase. It's an escalation. That's what's happening right now. The only reason we're not devastated already is because there's still ice. Okay? When the ice is gone, it's bang, like that. Rapid temperature increase. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I was going to interject.
I don't even remember the question. Okay.
I think we'll go to if it's okay, Seth, we'll go. There are lots of questions.
But just
for
really
you.
quickly, the question about the saturation, it's really sort of a non-question. We have to be doing this. And the only real saturation is parts per million in the atmosphere. When it gets down below 300, that'll be an okay time to be happy.
Great.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so I've actually got 3 comments. One is, and just coming back to Ryan's comment about agroecology, and this is, definitely FAO is promoting it. There's obviously a global south implication, but the European Parliament is looking at it. So it is being looked at in the global north and being looked at seriously. So I think that's, from a Canadian perspective, don't discount the fact that it's not happening elsewhere. Secondly, actually, I do agree with you there, Andrea, about the large corporations getting on board and driving the change. I come from Loblaws. I'm a retired Loblaw executive. That's where an enormous amount of change can be made. And McDonald's, certainly in what they're doing, and if others get on the bandwagon, can have a very, very marked impact, much more so in some ways than government. And then finally, I don't want to rain on Jarrod's parade too much because I think it's a very interesting prospect what he's have. Jarrod, though, I would contend that a lot of your success at the moment is not environmental interest. It's because there's an enormous amount of interest in protein. And in fact, you have a product that is there and meeting consumers' desire to bulk up on protein. I do think, though, and where I think the fantastic thing about your product is that it is actually is dealing with the ick factor, as we've talked about in the past. And as the ick factor dissipates, and I think what you're doing is going to be increasingly, then I think your product will have more of a role in terms of from an environmental opportunity. And you're looking at the science of it. Thank you.
Great. I think there were some women who had questions as well. Maybe this woman here.
Thank you very much. Tulika Rastogi with Humane Canada. I wanted to first say how much I appreciated all of the panel's presentations. Thank you all, and thanks for bringing these wonderful people. All of the panels were fantastic. I just wanted to raise a couple of questions or points on the basis of animal welfare and humane considerations. Because sometimes we tend to talk a lot about other aspects and innovation and investment, sure, and environment and climate change just recently in the previous panel. I wanted to respectfully talk about animal welfare. So a paradigm, for those who may not know, of how to define animal welfare is three aspects, three pillars, well, or in a Venn diagram, three circles. One being biological functioning, the second being affective states, and the third being natural condition. And Jarrod, this question is mainly to you, or this comment. You spoke about the crickets in the farm, in the barns that you have, and you spoke about the fact that they're behaving normally. So that speaks a little bit to biological functioning, perhaps. We don't really have a great understanding of the experiences of many species on this planet. Basically, even some of the mammalian species that we're farming, and certainly some of the fish species we're still learning a lot about. We probably have very, very, very little knowledge, if any, about insects and their experiences. So I wonder about the affective states of these animals, that, like, what is it that they're experiencing, positive and negatively. They're not going outdoors at all from how I understood the farming setup. So what natural conditions are being provided to them? So just a question really about that as a viable approach from an animal welfare perspective, and a question regarding how are they slaughtered? How are they actually prior to milling, how are they killed? And the second comment, or on a different topic regarding animal welfare that I just wanted to mention, is that while there may be many questions and many concerns regarding cell-cultured meat products, from an animal welfare perspective, there's actually many people who are very excited about this form of production because of the fact that we don't have to slaughter and kill and use animals in that process.
Great,
thank you.
Thanks. Just first quickly to Paul's comment, thank you, and I agree with you in part. When that study came out on the gut biome and how cricket powder improved probiotic microbiota associated with better health, our sales that week shot up. It's for its health reasons that we have early adoption. It's not for bodybuilders per se or people looking to bulk up on protein. And we learned very quickly after kind of launching as a sustainability company that people were pretty selfish. They'll talk about sustainability and spending bucks on sustainability, but they won't. But they will spend dollars if they think it will improve their health or the health of their kids. But that we're at the beginning of that story, and I appreciate your point. There are entomologists that have been studying insects for years. I think that there is a lot of knowledge. We're working with entomologists at different universities in Canada to answer some of these questions and look at how we can maximize yield and just look at the chemistry and sociology and all these different aspects and elements, so that if we're going to do it and it's going to be industrialized, that we do it a bit differently than our predecessors have done with other livestock, so that it's healthy. It's not something we have to undo and redo like we're discussing with a lot of the other production. So we use CO2 gas to harvest them, basically. There is a stress response. I can tell you that microwaving them to kill them, to cull them, that the evidence we've seen so far is there's almost no measurable stress response. So microwaving them to cull them is likely the most humane way to do it. Unfortunately, we don't think the public will understand the optics of that. So we have another learning curve to get to. Because we say we use ice and the CO2 gas from dry ice or direct CO2 gas, and we slowly put them to sleep, and then they eventually pass on, and then we rinse, roast, and grind them. In different climates, we can absolutely have outdoor access. That's only because we're in Canada and we have to deal with the winters. But if we were around the equator, it's very possible we could do this in kind of more normalized or naturalized settings. But as far as compared to other livestock, I think they're in pretty good shape and serving a purpose, I guess. I mean, we have to eat.
Can I respond to the ethical question of killing and culling? Thank you. First of all, you may have noticed I've just put on this shawl and now I'm holding this club. This is a Maasai shawl for my colleagues in Kenya, and this is a club. You may notice there's a golf ball on the top of it. I'm not quite sure how that golf ball got into their area in Kenya, but it did. But anyway, so we have a chapter in Kenya, and I traditionally now when I give talks, I do wear the shawl and I do hold this club, and they have made me an honorary member of their village, and I'm proud and happy for that. And even today, they're working on a project that we're involved with. But I just want to say that I participated in the culling of a goat the last time I was there. And what sort of shocked me was they said, well, we know you're Jewish, and your method of slaughter is to slice the throat. We believe ours is more humane. And is it okay with you if we kill the goat according to our method? And this was a profound experience for me, as you can imagine. And their method is simply to suffocate it. And they just put their hand over its nose. And I know you think that sounds horrible, but within 15 seconds it was passed out. And within a minute after that, we were drinking its blood, literally. That's how the Maasai do it, and that's how they're going to do it. And that's the reality on the ground. And the other reality on the ground is that we're helping them expand their herd and do holistic planned grazing, and we're working with the University of Nairobi to monitor the soil. So it's the whole thing. And when there's carbon markets, they'll be rewarded for it. So that's a day in my life in this field. Thank you.
This is a quick question for Jarrod. Full disclosure, I have not yet worked up the courage to crunch down a cricket, but I'm working on it. Anyway, but what I would like to know more is about the potential for insects as animal feed. I know Enterra Feed Corporation is doing some really interesting stuff on the West Coast in terms of aquaculture, but I don't know the culinary preferences or nutritional requirements of most livestock, so I'd be curious to hear about, not only just substituting for conventional livestock production, but also lowering the impact of the existing systems as well. Thanks.
No problem. So there's almost two completely different businesses within the world of edible insects for livestock feed. There's all the stuff that's going on with BSF or black soldier fly larvae. They're raising in the tens of millions of dollars. There's a project in South Africa that's massive, and they're using mainly pre- and post-consumer waste. Then there's the other side, and I think, like we discussed maybe yesterday, there's going to be feed formulators that are going to take some mealworms with some black soldier flies, with some crickets, and look at the chemistry that will be this feed formulation for fish or this for chicken. I think the most exciting part, and it's a pity that Kate left, is that a scientist from Italy called us and he said, what steroids and antibiotics and stuff are you using to grow like 35 million crickets in 20,000 square feet? And we said, none. And he said, well, that's impossible. You can't raise livestock without prophylactically or doing something, otherwise they're going to get sick and die. So long story short, it's the cockroach story. These insects have hyperbolic immune systems. And now we're beginning to understand why. And it's likely due to specific protein peptides that give them this enhanced immunity. So the question is, if you feed that to other vertebrates, can that be transferred? And so far, the answer seems to be yes. A shrimp aquaculturist who added 10% of mealworm powder to the traditional shrimp meal doubled the survival rates of the hatchlings. So we're trying to reframe the framework that this isn't so much about an alternative to fish meal. This may be an alternative to steroids, prophylactic antibiotics, and things of that nature. And you know, it's shocking that feeding insectivores insects is better for their health than feeding them, you know, something that's being manufactured. So it's a great question. We're doing a lot of projects in dog food, particularly lap pets. Formulating treats is no problem because you don't have to make label claims. Dog food, especially in the US, is very highly regulated. So it's an exciting opportunity in that space too, to take some of that diverted meat that's going toward the pet food markets and bring it back to human if there's an opportunity for insects in pet food.
Just a few more questions, I think.
We're going to try and go back to what Ryan was doing with the two people. So we'll do Kyle and then Goretti. That's okay.
Thanks. Kyle Mortimer-Prue, so I'm the chef on the committee, or in the panel here. I have a question about labor. As your production, Jarrod, has been scaling up very quickly, obviously being on the shelves of Loblaws, how has your labor cost expanded? And also, what about health concerns for workers compared to, you know, the beef industry and pork industry and stuff like that, where there's obviously a higher risk associated with repetitive motion and working with knives and stuff like that? What sort of factors are impacting you?
So on the cricket farming side, it's not as labor intensive as one would imagine. On the processing side is where we need the innovation in technology to help us scale up and amortize that without necessarily using labor. I think that answers the first question. So yeah, we're growing. We're up to 30 employees now. I mean, it's awesome. These are very passionate farmers. It's hot in those barns. You could not do the job just for the dollar. There's got to be something more to you to care to be there, because it's tough work. And then on the safety side, most allergens or issues is in inhalation. So we are working with allergenists to understand that piece better from the consumption side and the farm worker side. So we encourage them to wear masks at this point. Does that answer your two questions?
Yeah, more so. I guess I'm trying to think about, and this could be open to the panel, sort of as you're trying to think about the global, or like how we can grow, how we can grow, you know, the insect market or any other sustainable protein. You have to consider the workers that are actually doing the work in terms of work-life balance, but safety as well. So how much of that is actually considered as we're looking at the dollars that are going to be invested into these different industries, right?
Yeah, it's a fair question, and I think to the earlier point, this is so new. We are so nascent. This is the beginning of the journey. Those are, I think, maybe our more sophisticated questions and easier answered in industries that have a long history, and you can look at data and you can measure that data. But we're trying to, like I said before, incorporate as much of that as we can along the way. So each move we make, each step we take, we're doing it as honestly and transparently as possible with everybody's best interest in mind. And that includes the work we're doing in Africa and empowering those people, where, by the way, we are giving away our intellectual property to empower these communities to raise their own locally domestic insects to change their lives.
Great. Maybe we could gather two questions before we get panel response. So, Goretti?
Sure. Quick sneak question to Sarah about what should we do in light of all this. But I also have a question for Seth around carbon markets and carbon credits and the claims that are being made around the amount of soil carbon. Like, it does depend on how degraded the soil is, how much carbon builds up. It can take a lot of years to build it up to the amount that we need to sequester what we need to sequester. Like, you know, depending on where you are, it could be 50 to 100 years. Some places will be faster. But how do you deal with the uncertainty around carbon credits for these systems? Because carbon estimations can be 100 to 200% off, and it takes 10 to 20 years to really see changes. And from one year to another, you can have fluctuations.
Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for this panel. My name is Laura Shine. I'd like to say, finishing a PhD in entomophagy, in the arrival of entomophagy in Canada. And my question is actually very quick for Jarrod. It has to do with, do you have any numbers or ideas about repeat consumption since you've made it into Loblaws? Because the novelty factor is obviously a very motivating one. Do you have any idea how that translates into actual adoption?
Before Seth gets to his question, not yet, but after November 8th, when we have a meeting with them, we will.
Thanks for the question. What's to be done? So I want to be really clear. I'm not against business. I'm not against corporations. I'm not against people setting up businesses. My concern is corporate concentration, which is fundamentally anti-capitalist, actually, and the control of the market. And so I think that the government has a role in regulating corporations, especially around food. I think it's fundamental. And around innovation and businesses, there's a lot of evidence that actually government research, government-funded research, really has driven a lot of important innovations, not only large corporations. And so I'm absolutely not against the sort of changes that McDonald's is making or Loblaws is doing as far as contributing to a more sustainable environment. But I am concerned about just a few corporations. If we look at, like in the last couple of years, agri-food input corporations have gone from they control somewhere over 80% of the market. They've gone from 6 to 4 globally. And so these have significant influences on what we as consumers can access. And I totally agree about the Competition Bureau, but they also approved with some modifications the Bayer takeover of Monsanto in Canada. And that's a concern. It's a real concern around who controls access to seeds, the choices farmers have, those sorts of things. And so I really want to underscore this. I'm not against business, but I am against 1 or 2 businesses or a handful of businesses controlling, whether it's the consolidation in Canada of supermarkets or despite the good work they do. That I think it's really important that we think carefully about the role of the government, and because they're the ones who actually can police competition in a fair way.
So did you want me to answer the question about the volatility of soil carbon? And yeah, it's a highly volatile medium. It can change quickly, and that is a challenge. And we've seen both. We've seen soil carbon degrade quickly and also improve quickly. So it is a palatable, malleable medium. And so the solution is that when you improve it, you have to continue the methodology. You have to just, if you're grazing or doing cover crops, you need to just keep doing it to get it. So if there is a saturation point, well, the data will show it. I couldn't imagine that happening for 10 or 20 years anyway, but some people say, it will build carbon for 100 years or 1,000. I mean, who knows? But we just have to start doing it. As far as the market is concerned, this will be open source, transparent scheme. So there's not going to be any monkey business going around. The carbon in the soil will drive the efficacy of the market. And so if the carbon goes down, then the value of the certificate goes down. Right? It's an immediate reflection. It's not based on a theoretical concept of, well, there's so much gold in Fort Knox. The price of the certificate is directly mapped to a verified ton of carbon in the ground. And if you don't have a ton of carbon in the ground, the price of the certificate goes down. if you have more than a ton of carbon in the ground, the price of the certificate goes up. And people say, hey, what are they doing? Right? I want to do more of what they're doing and less of what those people are doing. So I think it's a fascinating concept. I did not come to this from the investment side. Ryan put me on this panel, so you can blame him. And I didn't get to graze. I mean, I was a traditional climate activist. If you had told me 15 years ago I'd be supporting grazing, I'd be like, what? I mean, I was a vegetarian, and even the equivalent of a vegan, it was called macrobiotic back in the day, so I'm dating myself. But this is where the science, as far as I'm concerned, this is where the science is leading us. The science is leading us to regenerative grazing, and the market mechanisms, or whatever you want to call it, is leading us to these type of carbon certificates.
Great, thanks, Seth. I think we have time for 2 quick questions, do we? Yes, Marie-José and Eric. Eric's been really patient.
You guys are super quick.
Okay.
Oh gosh. Okay, so lots to say, but I guess I'm gonna enjoy the fact that we can have so great people here. So Andreas, I miss your last name. I really appreciate the fact that you are here with us. And I want to, I was supposed to ask the question, but you answer very well, Sarah. I would love to hear your position on this whole issues of, we've been talking so much about all kinds of perspectives and data and science and research. One of my frustration, I guess, right now is the divestment, the de-investment, whatever, of the government in research, in independent research, which I think is a real problem. And my fear when I'm listening to some of the government policies and governance going on within Canada about climate change, but also about the food policy that's coming around the corner. And I think we need to bring back the agri-food policies that we need. And the food movement has been really vocal, trying to diversify the type of voices that are emerging. And the agroecology element, I think we are missing the boat very highly if we do not engage with that debate. And I think that's from, I'm here at U of O, but I'm really speaking as a Canadian citizen that's very much interested in the future of agriculture and health and the economy. You know, I think all of this is coming together, but I'm just very curious to know what is it that's on the Canadian government agenda for like not only the high-tech end of agriculture, which is going to just concentrate even more the market and the enterprise. Thanks.
Yeah, can I build on this because it's very similar. I mean, it's funny you asked this question. I was going, the last 2 days, lots of us had, many of us had very interesting proposal, suggestions, way forward, you know, and we can disagree on is this better than something else, but more or less, you know, we all recognize this, and and I don't want to target you, Andrea, because I think it's all addressed to all of us as citizens. But I'm wondering what we could have done with $1.5 billion of a pipeline in issues which actually address not only climate change, but also food, the future of agriculture, and so forth. So it's not a question, obviously.
It's a provocation.
But I think, but we have to look at the scale of what we're doing it currently, right? And I think we have to be more holistic and systemic in our approach. And maybe as citizens, we haven't put enough pressure.
So just before before I close, Andrea is not an elected official, and we don't want to place all our concerns about the Canadian government on her shoulders. But unfortunately, we do have to end now. There are people who need to get to train stations and so on and so forth. Thank you so much. Thank you to the audience for coming out. Thank you to the panelists for seeing the potential and the usefulness of a venue of an event like this. And thank you to sponsors who helped make this happen. Thank you to Gibbs for doing a lot of the web and IT stuff, and Shannon and some of the other volunteers. I think I just want to reiterate how deeply grateful I am to everyone here, basically, for helping to make this event the event it was. Very finally, this is just the first phase of a project on conceptualizing what the future of sustainable protein might be, or future of sustainable agri-food might be. The next phase is going to get more in the way of policy-oriented takeaways that we might be able to draw from this discussion. And we'll have to think a little bit creatively and innovatively about how to interpret some of the differences of opinion that we've seen, and emphasize the points of consensus that we've seen as well. So join me in thanking yourselves for a great day.